Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale T26e3 Pershing tank. Now, unlike many of the other smaller scale builds which are found on the ECA channel, in which those builds are built for private commission and belong to a private collector, the model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these smaller scale build videos, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging from 1/35th scale all the way up to 1/6th scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. Now, the model here is built mostly out of the box. However, I did make some modifications and alterations to the stock kit. We'll be going over all of these additions and modifications in this video. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. This vehicle here is the T26e3 Pershing. The T26e3 was the final pre-adoption designation for what would become the M26 Pershing. The story of this vehicle dates back to 1942 and 1943 timeframe. During this time, the U.S. Armored Corps was broken down into three subunits. You had the light, medium, and heavy tank classifications. For the light tank role, this was for the M3 and M5 Stuart light tank. For the medium tank role at this time, there were still some M3 Lees still in inventory, but these were soon to be phased out with the newer and ubiquitous M4 Sherman. And for the heavy tank role, this was designated for that of the M6. Of these three classifications, only two of which were actually viable and were able to be fielded during the war by the U.S. military. These would be the light and medium tanks. The heavy tank designation and the heavy tank program, which again was the M6, was in an almost never-ending research and development spiral, and the vehicle itself was quickly becoming antiquated with the newer technologies which were being developed. Also, at this time, the second generation of German tanks were beginning to be fielded and were beginning to be encountered by the Allies on both Eastern and Western fronts. These vehicles would be the Panther and the Tiger I. Because there was never any real heavy tank adopted by the U.S. at this period and being fielded at this period, the brunt of the armor work was going to be done by the M4 Sherman. Now, the M4 Sherman, when it was designed, at that period, the comparable threat vehicles at the time would have been the Panzer III and the Panzer IV, of which the Sherman can compete with and is basically comparable to these vehicles. However, with the new second generation of German tanks, the Sherman's original design was definitely going to be at a disadvantage compared to these newer vehicles. One of the first prototypes that came out of the heavy tank developmental program was that of the T20. The T20 was unique in that it differed from the previous US tank designs with having the automotive aspect, that of the power pack, the engine, and the transmission, all in the rear portion of the tank. Unlike the previous generation, such as the Sherman, the Stuart, and the Lee, where we have the engine located in the rear, there's a long drive shaft that runs to a front transmission and differential gearbox. The T20 did away with this. By going with this route, the entire tank's height and profile became a lot lower in comparison to the other vehicles of the period. The T20 was still utilizing many of off-the-shelf components from that of the standard Sherman, such as the suspension and a few other fittings. The T20 program showed promise, however, that vehicle still needed a lot more research and development to bring it up to the next step. This takes us to the T23. The T23 utilized a brand new turret, which was that armed with a 76mm gun, and it also retained a more improved version of the lower profile hull. The T23 failed to enter into production. However, one interesting aspect was that of the turret. The T23 turret was deemed to have very good ballistics with that of the new 76mm gun, and that turret wound up on the hulls of M4 Shermans, which we still refer to it as the T23 turret. One of the reasons why the T-23 was not adopted was that the armor thickness as well as the main gun was not going to be adequate with dealing with the heavy German tanks, namely that of the Tiger I, and soon to be coming onto the scene, that of the King Tiger. With the T-23 being upgraded even further, takes us directly to the T-26. The T-26 was really where the design was starting to take its final shape. What made the T-26 different from the predecessors like the T-25 and the T-23 is that for the first time this vehicle used a torsion bar suspension. The other vehicles were utilizing either VVSS Sherman suspensions or even that of the HVSS Sherman suspension. With the torsion bars, this also is a leap past the M4 Sherman and other legacy vehicle designs. With addition of the torsion bars, the vehicle also required wider track links compared to that of the VVSS due to the more weight that is found in the tank's turret and hull armor. For the vehicle's main gun, a 90mm gun was incorporated. The vehicle still utilized two M1919A4 machine guns, one located in the coaxial position next to the gun, and the other mounted in the bow in the hull of the vehicle, just like many of the other vehicles of the period. Of course, being an American tank, on top of the turret is dressed with an M2 HB 50 caliber machine gun. The vehicle was powered by the Ford GAF V8 engine, which was a spin-off of the Ford GAA V8, which was utilized on the M4A3 Sherman. The vehicle came in at around 46 tons, and the top speed of the vehicle on road was 30 miles an hour, with about 5.5 miles an hour with its off-road running. By 1944, the T26e3 was basically ready for being fielded and adoption. However, the vehicle was delayed from actually seeing service up until the very tail end of the war. The reason for this has to do primarily with that of the U.S. Army brass. There were some concerns with that of logistics, as well as also actual doctrinal ways that these vehicles would be used. Because of which, these vehicles did not get a chance to see service until, again, the final months of the war. By the war's end, 2,212 units were produced, which is actually an astonishingly high number considering that the vehicles were not in production for a very long period of time. The vehicles did make it in theater at the time the United States was about to invade Germany. The two most notable examples of usage of the T26e3 Pershing was that at the Battle of Remagen, as well as the most famous video footage is that of the T26e3 knocking out a panther in front of the Cologne Cathedral. After the war, the vehicles were placed into storage. However, they would not be sitting idle for long, as after the war, the situation in Korea began to deteriorate very quickly, and these tanks had their biggest moment of fame while serving in the Korean conflict. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplied you with. And here's the model at the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35 scale plastic M26 Pershing T26e3 kit from Tamiya. This kit here has been on the market for a number of years, and the kit originally was released by Tamiya back in 2002. At the time, there was a lot of buzz with the release of this kit in the armor modeling racket, namely because at that time, there weren't really a whole lot of options available to the builder to build this pattern of vehicle. The only other options that were available were the 1/35 scale plastic kits from Dragon. They had a T26e3 Pershing, as well as a M26A1. Which is interesting to point out that I built one of the Dragon M26A1 kits, and a video of that can be found on the video listings. However, those kits, even though they are very nicely done, at that point were on the market for a number of years as well. Those kits originally came out in the mid-1990s, and the Dragon kits do have some hurdles with them, namely that with the assembly of the Lincoln Lane track, which does add a lot of complexity to the build. The Tamiya kit here offered a different option compared to the Dragon kits, as the Tamiya kits are a lot easier to put together compared to their Dragon counterparts. It's also interesting to point out that shortly after the release of their 1/35 scale Pershing kit, Tamiya announced and released their 1/16 scale full option M26 Pershing tank kit. And again, I've also built a few other variations of that particular kit, which are also found on the video listing. One advantage that this kit has is its sheer proliferation. This kit has been in production now for a number of years, and with the addition of the numbers produced, Tamiya also has a very good distribution network. If a hobby shop stocks Tamiya kits, you may have a good chance in snagging one of these in the store. In addition to that, these kits can easily be found on any litany of online retailers, anywhere from eBay to Amazon to a number of online hobby shops. This particular kit here I purchased off of Amazon.com about a year ago, so it hasn't been sitting in the shop for a terribly long period of time. Also, because of the proliferation, the vehicles and the kit's price is also going to be very competitive. These kits here can be had anywhere between $25 to about $45 US. Moving our way to the model's graphic design, as you can see, the box art is your typical standard Tamiya. White background with the tank in the forefront. And they also have a little side portion over here. As for the quality of the piece, it is typical Tamiya, which means it's very nicely painted. Even though the artist did forget to paint the little hole that is on the engine hoist. Typical font usage. And as for the sides of the box, it has here your little marking chart with the various different type of markings that the kit does have. On this side here we have some more information as well as some little accessories that also are supplied with the kit. Cracking open the box reveals its kit contents. Now this kit here is a all plastic model kit. There is no photo etch or aluminum barrels or any of those type of fancy type features that are supplied with these models. Now, for anyone who's a fan of the channel, these parts here are going to feel very deja vu-ish, as I recently completed a 1/35 scale Tamiya Super Pershing kit. That kit was basically the same kit contents over here, however with the addition of a couple extra runners to build the tank in its Super Pershing configuration. As for the quality of the plastic parts, they are very nicely done. The pieces are molded in the standard Tamiya olive drab plastic. And pieces like the turret do have some nice fine details present, which would include that of some cast texturing as well as some foundry marks and casting numbers. Being a Tamiya kit, the kit itself is going to be very simple when it comes time to the assembly compared to the other counterparts on the market, which are slightly more detailed, however are a little bit more difficult to put together. Things like the bins that have the handles molded in is a trait found on the Tamiya kits, which on the Dragon or the Bronco kits are small features which have to be glued on. Here goes the suspension runner. As for the molding, the small fasteners are very crisply rendered and is something that is typical for Tamiya quality. We have here an accessory runner, which is almost a mirror image of the 1/16 scale Pershing accessory runner, as well as many of the other features found on the kit are also very reminiscent to the ones found on the 1/16 counterpart as well. Here we have another runner of just some more tank parts of the mantlet, rotor drum, the cupola, and the engine grates. Down to the bottom takes us to the lower hull. Adequate detailing for the scale and for the medium. Now moving down to the bag of the last little bag here of bits. Now the Tamiya kit is noteworthy in that they do give you the parts to have a semi-working suspension. where they give you some springs and some fasteners in order to build the model so that the suspension can be articulated in a certain way. I'll be going over more about this after the unboxing portion of this video. And all the way on the bottom takes us to the one-piece vinyl tracks. The vinyl tracks are that of the single pin all steel variant, which is present on the T26e3 Pershing. As for the medium that they are represented in, there is some nice adequate detailing present, and should make for a nice, easy, and problem-free build. Moving down further takes us to our decal sheet. There are a lot of different options for vehicles to build, and all of which are well illustrated in the Tamiya instructions. As for the instructions, they give you a nice little brief history on the development of American as well as Russian tank designs. Nice little illustration of the Pershing in Korea. And then we're back into the actual build of the model. Knowing Tamiya's decals, this should make for a very problem-free build. Starting with the tank's running gear and suspension, the suspension components that you see here are all stock with the kit. The Tamiya kit's pieces are very nicely tooled, and the detailing is nice and crisp on these pieces. They are also very well engineered and assemble very quickly and easily. One contributing factor to that is that these wheels are held on with that of polycaps. The polycap system is a technique that Tamiya likes to incorporate on many of their tank kits in the past, and again lend itself for a simple and quick installation. While on the suspension, this is at the point to bring up the semi-working suspension feature, which is an interesting feature found on these Tamiya Pershings. Now, I may have mentioned this in the unboxing portion, but I definitely mentioned in more detail on the Super Pershing Tamiya kit video, which I recently completed. These vehicles here have a feature where you can have the suspension semi-articulate to contour that of a diorama base. The way this is done is that you have two small fasteners found on the inside of the tank. These fasteners would protrude from the bottom of the hull, and the tank would be physically bolted to the bottom of the diorama. Now, in order to have the tank stand up, the first and last row wheel on each side has a small little micro spring that needs to be bolted to the inside, much in the same way and fashion that's done on the 116 counterpart. However, unlike that tank in which all of the suspension arms have this feature, and are spring assisted, only the first and last ones are found on the 135 variant. The wheels in the center, their swing arms can move independently and are held on with that of a polycap. There is no sort of resistance or any type of rebound found on these center portions. Now, to do that didn't require any extra work. In fact, the Pershing kit is actually designed to have the suspension mounted in a static manner. It also has the ability for the sprockets to be powered by a gearbox, but that looks like a feature that never ever came to see the light of day. However, in order for you to do the actual procedure for making the components work, you technically have to modify the kit. Now, this is all illustrated in the instructions, very clear and precise. However, to modify the pieces with a sharp X-Acto knife, you need to remove a small little key and that is found on each of the swing arms. The purpose of this key is that there is a groove on that is molded inside of the hull in which the swing arm would simply lock into place and keep it in its adjusted height. This is the same exact procedure as found on every single tank model with that of a torsion bar suspension static setup. When you're building this kit and you don't want to do the working suspension, you simply take the swing arms and glue them to the side of the hull in the same ways you would on any other tank kit. It's actually simpler to do it this way and also quicker. With this model here, since it is only being used for static display on flat surfaces, the semi-working suspension feature is a noble concept, but it's definitely one that I don't necessarily need. Moving up from the suspension takes us to the front hull detailing. Starting with the bow M1919, the kit features the bow mounted 30 caliber machine gun. The mods that I made to it was that I went ahead and drilled out the muzzle section, which is a typical feature I do on my builds. Now, of course, this is done with a very small drill bit and at very slow speeds. In fact, the Dremel's not even utilized. I just use a pin vise in order to carefully drill out the center portion. Like I also frequently mentioned, this should only be done with someone that has a lot of experience with working with small type of features like this, as you can easily screw up these components here, which will lead to some issues. One nice feature that the Tamiya kit does have is that the bow machine gun is pivotable, and if I could get this in frame, you can see that you can adjust the machine gun in any way you desire. It's a nice little feature that it has. Moving from the machine gun takes us to the bow headlight brush guards. You'll notice I have the little cylindrical can, which is found on these American AFV bow headlights at this period. There's one on this side here, and another on this side. Now, if you notice on the Pershing, the small little jars are mounted on the inside portion of the brush guards, and not the outside portion, which is found on vehicles like the Sherman. While on the headlights, another mod that I made was that I went ahead and have clear resin headlights for that of the lenses. Now, what's interesting about the kit is that this didn't require any modifications to the kit's headlights themselves. The kit headlights are designed that you have an opaque piece of plastic that gets glued into the section there for that of the headlight. Now, the headlights are already hollow, so you don't even have to drill them out. For this procedure, I simply mixed some 5-minute epoxy and added them to the appropriate locations. Of course, the inner portion of the headlights were painted before the epoxy was added. With this little modification, this greatly increases the accuracy and quality of the model, as opposed to just trying to paint them white and or silver, as many people like to do. Moving from the headlight takes us to the siren. Now, the siren is the kit supplied unit and was simply built as is out of the box. One modification I did make, however, was the addition of the power cord, which emerges from the rear of the siren and enters into the hull. The wire is a simple small piece of floor wire and does help the look of the model. Moving our way to the model's rear, all the detailing you see here is all stock from the Tamiya kit and went together without any issues. The kit does feature the travel log, and as you can see, just like with the 1/16 scale variant, it is functional in that you can have it in the deployed or retracted state. Now, as for the exhaust, the only modification I made was that I added some extra cast texturing to this component, as the real pieces were casted and did have some rough texturing on the actual units. With the extra cast texturing added to the piece, this also greatly helps the accuracy of the build and makes it stand out and pop compared to leaving it with its stock configuration. Another mod that I made to the rear that helps with the accuracy is that of the small little power cord, which emerges from that of the telephone box. This was a simple addition made with, again, the same floor wire that I used for the siren power cable. It just comes out and enters into the hull right here on the side. Moving from the exhaust and the rear deck takes us to the upper deck and the upper hull. The components you see here are all stock Tamiya, and no modifications were made to this section of the model in any shape or any form. This is one of the reasons why this kit does go together very quickly. Moving to the tank's turret, the turret is comprised of two halves, which is common for just about most tank kits on the market, and the center seam was deleted with that of some cast texturing, which fused everything together. This is found on both sides in the rear of the turret. Starting with the front portion, on the T26e3 and on the M26 Pershing, there are two hoists which are integrally casted into the turret. The purpose of this is that when the turret is canted to the rear portion like this, the hoist can be used to hoist the engine out of the engine bay when the grills are open and the center plate removed. Now, these are supplied with the kit. However, one mod that I made was that I drilled out these sections here on either side. This is a common trick and feature that I incorporate on smaller scale M26 Pershing kits, as generally they are molded solid. This is also true for the 1/16 variant as well. Moving to the rear portion of the turret, this is where some mods were made. The rear section of the bustle is where the 50 caliber storage equipment would be mounted. When the 50 wouldn't be in use, the gun would be removed from its pintle mount, placed in the storage pintle. The vented barrel section would be clamped in this unit here, and the barrel would be removed and stowed in these two sections. Now, on the Tamiya kit, the kit does have the angled pieces present, as well as the pintle and the barrel clamp mount. However, the sections that are actually meant for clamping on the barrel are not present. The versions you see here were fabricated out of thin strips of aluminum and were bent, shaped, and then mounted to the model. This is definitely one area that greatly helps the look of the model compared to leaving it with its stock configuration. Another mod that I made was that on the track ratchet jacks, I went ahead and drilled out the small little section here that is found on the end. This is another trick that I do on these 1/35 scale tanks, as well as also on the 1/16 scale versions as well. Drilling this section out, just like with the machine guns, is also a very risky procedure and is one that should be done with someone of a lot of experience and tooling. This is done to both of the jacks found on each side of the turret. While on the turret, takes us to the antenna bases. The antenna base that you see here are kit supplied, and what's a nice feature is that the kit gives you two types of antennas to mount to the model. We have here the MP65 and the MP48. MP48 is your standard spring antenna base, which has been found and used on almost all of the American tanks during the wartime period. To paint these components, this is something I frequently mention. On the MP48, the metal sections would be painted with olive drab or the same color of the vehicle. However, the center portion here where those little ribs are, on the real tank, this is the insulator and is actually made from a red ceramic. This is one common feature that is frequently missed on builds that I've seen done by very nice builders, is that they forget to paint the little insulator. Painting the insulator is one of the most important features you could do on these small scale tanks, and it really helps the look and definitely raises the model up a few notches instead of just leaving everything with the base coat. Now on the MP65, this too features a porcelain insulator, and that is on the bottom portion here of the base. Now on the real MP65, the middle section here is actually made from a flexible rubber, and then the top portion would be metal, and this is where the antenna wire would connect to. Now on the Tamiya kit, the MP48 is a decent piece for a stock component. However, there are better aftermarket ones on the market, namely that from Aber, and there's another version from another company that I don't recall that actually has a real spring in it. Those units are very nicely done. However, for this kit here, the out-of-box unit is suffice for my build. There is a small little notch molded into the side of the antenna base for you to mount on the antenna wire. For the wire, it's a very thin piece of fluoro wire, which again is the same gauge that I used on the other sections of the build that I already mentioned. As for the antenna itself, these are painted black, and on the real American tanks, the antenna would have two knurled tips on them, one found on the top and the bottom. The purpose of this is that you can connect multiple sections together to have longer antennas for certain applications. As for the knurled tips, the top portion is always red and the bottom portion would be blue. This is another trick that is almost always neglected and missed on almost all of the kit builds that I've seen on YouTube, as well as even in model shows. A simple swipe of paint is more than suffice to give you the look of the piece. Now, with this very small scale, you're not going to be able to actually model that of the knurled tip connecting piece, but with a simple drop of paint, it gives the look of the piece that it would be there. Moving from the insulators takes us up to the M2HB. The machine gun you see here is the kit original, and for this build was simply used as is. One modification I did make was that of the muzzle end. Again, just like with the 1919, I drilled it out. This helps the look of the piece, like I frequently mention. Now, one interesting quirk that the Tamiya Pershing kit has is that the stock machine gun cradle and the pintle mount are all molded as one piece, which is interesting because the machine gun is on a runner that gives you the machine gun, the ammo can, as well as a yoke to be mounted into a pintle mount. To modify the piece, I simply cut the molded in cradle off of the pintle mount and I drilled it out. Once drilled out, the other piece simply just drops right in. It's a simple mod that I made, and with this you get to adjust the 50 caliber into any position that you desire, which makes it a little bit more interesting in its layout compared to just having it with it steady and stuck in the forward position. Moving on to the paint and the weathering, the paintwork that you see here is my usual standard World War II shade of olive drab with my typical type of weathering. As for the markings you see on this model here are that of the Tamiya Kit Supply decals. The Kit Supply water slide decals were good quality, which is typically found on Tamiya kits. They mounted as is and were very problem free. One nice feature that the decals do have is that on the rear section here, over the radiator guard, there's a large star. Now, due to the shape of the radiator guard, where you have this little tub in which there's the filler spout for that of the liquid, the decal would have problems in getting into this recesses over here. So what the Tamiya kit does is that they actually have a hole in the star marking in which you would put the star in its correct location, and the center portion would actually be left the color of the tank. The reason for this is, again, for that of the marking. And the concept is that you would put the decal over this area and that green area in the center would be painted flat white by the builder. As you can see, once everything was lacquered on and airbrushed in, it leaves for a seamless appearance and is definitely a nice design feature that Tamiya incorporated with this piece. The kit also supplies you with several other markings in order to build the tank to represent a number of different type of Pershings that served anywhere from late 1945 in Germany all the way up into the Korean War with the United States Marines. For anyone who's a frequent viewer or a fan of the ECA channel, you'll know that this is not my first rodeo with the M26 Pershing family. In fact, there are several examples found on the ECA channel of Pershings that I've done in 1/35 scale, as well as 1/16 scale, and even the largest in my collection, which is the 1/6 scale version of the tank. On the table right here, I have two of the other 1/35 scale M26 Pershings that I've built. Now, all three of these vehicles, namely the two on the right-hand corner, have been showcased on the ECA channel, and each of these vehicles have a video for them. A link is found in the video description listed below. In those videos, I go more in depth to the actual nuances and subtleties of these different versions of the tanks. As for the T26e4, the kit itself is basically nothing more than a upgraded version of the Tamiya T26e3. The only difference that this kit has compared to this one is that of the longer gun, as well as the rear counterweight and the elongated travel lock found in the rear. Other than that, this kit here utilizes the exact same tooling which is found on this model. Now, this vehicle here is that of the Dragon M26A1 Pershing, which was the final iteration of the Pershing before it was upgraded and the design was changed to that of the M46, which got the designation of patent. Now, the Dragon kit is also a lot older compared to the tooling found on the Tamiya kit. The Tamiya kits came out in 2002, and the Dragon kits were released in the mid-1990s. However, even though these kits are considerably older, their tooling is still considered some of the best tooling of the period. In fact, these kits have aged very well and are still a viable option for anyone who's interested in building a rendition in 1/35 scale of either the T26e3 and the M26A1, as Dragon released both of those kits. One noteworthy feature that the Dragon kit does have, arguably compared to the Tamiya kit, is that of the tooling on the turret. Now, both of the turrets do have their cast texturing rendered. However, on the Dragon kit, it's a lot more pronounced and a lot more noticeable, specifically after the model's painted compared to the Tamiya. Now, the Tamiya kits do have their cast texturing and can be seen in person. It might not come through in video, but it's not nearly to the extent that is found on the Dragon counterpart. The Dragon kits also have more components in order to build the tank in the way you see it here, as on the Tamiya kit, many of these features would have been molded into the top deck. On the Dragon kit, these would have been separate pieces that required to be glued on separately. This does make for a nicely detailed model that does have some fine, crisp detailing, just for the way the pieces are tooled up, compared to the Tamiya counterpart. Again, having said that, the Tamiya kit is still a very nice option on the market. Now, what would be interesting is if I ever acquire the Bronco rendition of the Pershing kit, as that would be a nice way to compare and contrast between all three of these kits. However, that would be something, of course, for a future video. Also, while here, I could briefly go over some of the differences between the M26A1 and the T26E3, starting with, of course, the shape of the blower. The A1, it's squared off, while the E3 was rounded. The A1 has no periscopes found on the top portion of the casting, and on the E3 not only were there backup periscopes, but the first 20 or so actually had brush guards found in these locations here. On the turret, you'll notice that on the T26E3 you'll have these engine support mounts found on the sides, while on the A1 these were dropped by this point. Some other details to point out are that of the turnbuckles found on the front fenders. These were not found on the T26E3, but were added later on due to a weak point in that of the shape of the tin work. And on the back, the T26E3 has the all-in-one encompassing exhaust manifold cluster with that of the Travelock. And on the M26A1, this was dropped. And the manifold is just that of an exhaust manifold with no mounts whatsoever. And the Travelock was mounted on the rear portion of the deck. Again, we have turnbuckles present, and on the A1 you would have these reinforcement ribs found on the bottom. Now the Tamiya kit does supply you with these pieces, however this is technically inaccurate as these were added later on after the T26E3s already saw service. This is more likely due to the fact that the vehicle that Tamiya studied and got their measurements from already was upgraded with these features post-war. Another big difference between the two types is that of the track that would have been utilized. The T26E3 would have had one of two styles of track. This track here is that of the single pin all steel track link. These track links were the first pattern track designed for the Pershing, and in addition to the tracks, they have a very distinctive pattern of sprocket. When the later pattern of track was developed, which is basically a offshoot of the HVSS Sherman track, the sprocket was redesigned to the shape here, which is more typical for what we expect to see on American tanks. And the spares would have been mounted in this configuration here, which greatly differs from that of the earlier pattern with the configuration of the layout. The final big difference between the two is that of the barrels. The 90mm gun found on the T26 and M26 would have been the bore evacuator-less barrel with that of the distinctive double baffle muzzle brake, while on the A1 the bore evacuator was added, and with the bore evacuator there was the one of two patterns of a single baffle muzzle brake. And then comparing everything with the T26E4, first point to notice is that of the cartoonishly long high velocity gun, and on the rear we have that of the counterweight, which is absent on both the A1 and the T26E3. And very similar to the M26A1, the travel lock for the main gun was moved to the rear, but rather than being in the center portion of the radiator guards, it is on the very rearmost portion of the engine deck. As for skill level and recommendation, being a Tamiya kit, these kits are very easy to assemble with the out-of-the-box components, and a beginner can possibly build one of these tanks without any issues, as long as they take their time with a few of the smaller fittings such as the handles and the brush guards and so on and so forth. However, anybody above the beginner level will obviously have absolutely no problems with putting one of these kits together. I recommend this kit for anyone who's a fan of World War II American armor, as well as American armor in general, and also Korean War armor as well. The M26, or in this case the T26e3 Pershing, is a very important milestone in U.S. armor development and basically set the groundwork for all the other tanks that followed it all the way up to today with the M1 Abrams. Now, even though this kit is arguably a lot simplified compared to some of the other offerings on the market, namely that from the Bronco kits, the Tamiya T26e3 still assemble very well and are still a relevant kit in order to build into a nice representation of a T26e3 Pershing. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Tamiya T26e3 Pershing tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted, as well as all the other smaller scale and larger scale builds that have been showcased on the ECA channel. In addition to that, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/16 and 1/6 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.